So today I'm going to examine the Wikipedia article of Leo Frank and explain why it's terrible. So who is Leo Frank? Leo Frank is a Jewish man who raped and murdered a 13-year-old child named Mary Fagan. And this happened in 1913 in Atlanta, Georgia. So I have some notes here which cover a lot of the details, but I want to point out why this article is so bad, because it says right here in the lead, modern researchers generally agree that Frank was wrongly convicted. So this is a terrible thing to say in an encyclopedia, and it's making an appeal to authority fallacy. And I'm going to explain why you can determine that Leo Frank was guilty from just reading Wikipedia's own article and not using any other source. Just as a background, in order to understand why Leo Frank is a pedophile and a child murderer, we need to establish some key facts. And there's some major players here. And now I need to point out, before I go any further, the American Defamation League, the ADL, was founded to defend this pedophile and murderer, Leo Frank, just because he's Jewish. That's it. This is Leo Frank. This is the pedophile and murderer. This is Mary Fagan. This is the victim. She was 13 years old. This is Jim Connolly. So this is actually the accomplice to Leo Frank, who helped try to cover up the murder. And he's the one who wrote the death note that was found near Mary Fagan's body. We're going to get to that in a little bit. And then there's this guy. Don't have a photo of him, but this is just a picture of this man, Newt Lee. So as you can see, Newt Lee, so this is the night watchman at this factory. So this whole thing took place in a pencil factory, which Leo Frank was the director of. So as you can see, Jim Connolly also was black, and Newt Lee, the night watchman, was black. Leo Frank was Jewish, and Mary Fagan was a white girl. So those are the major people involved in this case. Well, we have some important facts here. Mary Fagan worked across the hallway from Leo Frank's office. Leo Frank saw her often. There's actually a diagram of this whole thing. And it's not the greatest diagram in the world, but you kind of get an idea of what was going on. So I think, this is kind of a crude diagram. It's kind of hard to read all the text down here. But I think this was Leo Frank's office, and I think this is where Mary Fagan worked. Okay, Mary Fagan was the victim. So all you need to know is that she worked across from Leo Frank's office, and Leo Frank saw her all the time. Okay, and it was testified by former workers at this factory that Leo Frank was a pervert and a womanizer. And Jim Connolly, remember that's this man, he was the accomplice. He apparently was paid higher wages than usual. So apparently he was just like a custodian or something. But he was paid higher wages than usual, was very unusual. Now the reason for why this was because apparently Jim Connolly would help him get women into his office for sex. I mentioned a death note. So there was a death note, and this is it. And it's going to be hard to read, but I have a transcription of it. So there were two death notes found near Mary Fagan's body in a pile of rubbish that was, just nearby the body. And these are forgeries. So these were intended to make investigators believe that Mary Fagan wrote these notes in her dying breaths before she passed away to identify who the real killer was, supposedly. So this is directly from the Wikipedia article, and I'm just going to read this whole thing. Frank, with Connolly's assistance, regularly met with women in his office for sexual relations. On the day of the murder, Connolly said he saw Fagan, that's Mary Fagan, the victim, go upstairs, from where he heard a scream coming shortly after. He then said he dozed off. When he woke up, Frank called him upstairs and showed him Fagan's body, admitting that he had hurt her. Connolly repeated statements from his affidavits that he and Frank took Fagan's body to the basement via the elevator before returning in the elevator to the office where Frank dictated the murder notes. So basically, what happened was Leo Frank had Jim Conley, this man, forge death notes to implicate someone else for the murder. So I'm going to read to you what these notes actually said. So the notes read as follows. He said he would love me, land down, play like the night witch did it. So night witch was supposed to be night watch. But that long, tall black Negro did boy hisself. And then that's the first note. The second note said, ma'am, that Negro hired down here did this. I went to make water, that means to urinate, and he pushed me down that hole, a long, tall Negro black, that who it was, long, slim, tall Negro, I write while play with me. So this was actually read by this other black man who was Newt Lee. So he was the night watchman. So what happened was the night watchman came across the body at I think 4 a.m. and he called police, and then they found these two death notes, in a pile of rubbish near the body, and he just read them out loud. Newt Lee did. So what these notes were trying, like it's broken English, but what the notes were trying to implicate was that a black man had murdered Mary Fagan. So when the police read this, they knew that these death notes were forgeries, that Mary Fagan did not write them. And they were able to prove who actually wrote them based upon that misspelling of night watchman, which was night witch or whatever. Um, so that guy, Jim Conley, that's how he understood that word to be written. He believes that night watchman was written as night witch or something like that. So that proved that he definitely wrote these death notes. The Leo Frank defenders, who are Jewish supremacists, they believe that Jim Conley was the true murderer. And so does this terrible Wikipedia article. Now, how we know that he wasn't the murderer is so obvious. Okay, because the death note is implicating a black man. It's implicating a black man. Now, Leo Frank was trying to frame this man, the night watchman Newt Lee. Why on earth, let's say Jim Conley really did do it, why on earth would Jim Conley implicate a black man in the murder of Mary Fagan? Okay, so he supposedly raped and murdered a white woman, a white girl, 13-year-old white girl. And then in a forged death note that's trying to pin the blame on someone else, he decides to pin the blame on a Negro, a black man. You're trying to draw attention away from yourself. He wouldn't do that. That's idiotic. The only person who would try to implicate a black man and get attention off of him was Leo Frank. That's it. If Jim Conley had really murdered Mary Fagan, there wouldn't be any death note. There wouldn't be any death note at all. Least of all, a death note that tries to implicate a black man, because then he would be under suspicion. So when Newt Lee was reading this death note to the police, he actually said to the police, they're trying to pin this on me. They're trying to lay it on me, is what he said. Newt Lee was arrested. But when they questioned Leo Frank, he was very, very nervous, which was extremely suspicious. Leo Frank was a very privileged man, which contradicts the narrative that we were always taught to believe, that Jews were perpetually oppressed and subjugated. This happened in 1913 in Atlanta, Georgia, in Jim Crow South, and Leo Frank, who was a Jew, was rich and had 8 lawyers for his defense. He was very privileged. The police did not believe Leo Frank's lies. He was arrested, and I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, but it's necessary. Don't want to bog things down too much with too many trivial details. And I also want to make it clear, I'm intentionally avoiding bringing up things like eyewitness testimony, because I think we can resolve this without needing that, because eyewitnesses, they can lie, they can misremember things. We should only rely on eyewitnesses when we don't have enough hard evidence to prove something otherwise. In this case, Leo Frank being guilty. And it's clear that Leo Frank is guilty without needing to resort to eyewitnesses who may lie for him. And Leo Frank did pay off his employees to lie for him. So during the trial, Leo Frank's defense, which consisted of 8 lawyers because he was very rich and privileged. Remember, he was the director of a pencil factory. Okay, he was not subjugated or oppressed. Leo Frank's defense questioned Jim Conley for 16 hours. They couldn't break his story. Then, after those 16 hours of intense questioning during the trial, they tried to have his testimony stricken from the record, and the judge refused. Okay, now keep in mind, this was an all-white jury. So this was a jury trial, and it was an all-white jury, and Leo Frank's 8 lawyers were trying to pin the blame on Jim Conley, a black man. The jury did not buy Leo Frank's lies, and they convicted him because it obviously was him. We know that the death notes were forgeries, but it didn't make any sense for Jim Conley to have been the rapist and the murderer because he wouldn't implicate another black man for this. Only Leo Frank would do it. And he was a pervert, a womanizer, who had hired Jim Conley basically to just, help him, have sex with women. So he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. But the death sentence was commuted by Governor John Slayton, who merged his law firm with Leo Frank's lead attorney. And this happened before Mary Fagan's murder. And this guy's name was Luther Rosser. So Governor John Slayton, who commuted Leo Frank's death sentence on appeal, had merged his law firm with Luther Rosser, who was Leo Frank's lead attorney before Mary Fagan was ever murdered. This was a clear conflict of interest. Leo Frank was never found innocent. He was lynched. He was only pardoned by the Georgia state in 1986 due to pressure from Jewish lobbyist groups like the ADL. The ADL itself was created to defend the pedophile and child murderer Leo Frank. This is why the Wikipedia article on Leo Frank is so terrible, because it deliberately tries to skew reality by having this sentence in the lead. Now, one of these citations cites a guy named Melnick. So this guy is Jeffrey Melnick, and I actually looked him up. And he's Jewish, and he calls himself an anti-Zionist and pro-Palestine. He wrote apparently a book which tries to sanitize and infantilize Leo Frank and claim that he's innocent. So Wikipedia actually cites this guy's book. The only and we just went over the evidence that it makes no sense at all for that death note to implicate a black person if the culprit was black. That makes no sense at all. But Jeffrey Melnick believes that Leo Frank is innocent just because he's a Jew. And the Wikipedia article cites this guy as an authority to give the impression to people that Leo Frank really was innocent when he wasn't. Okay, that's my beef. And it really pisses me off because this is what we see with many anti-Zionist Jews, in that they claim they're anti-Zionist, they claim that they are pro-Palestinian, but at the end of the day, they're actually Jewish supremacists, and they will defend Jews who are pedophiles and murderers just because they're Jewish. That's the only evidence that they actually need, and I find that to be repulsive. And these people brainwash liberals to promote Jewish supremacy as well. It doesn't matter that the evidence proves that Leo Frank is guilty. Since he's Jewish, therefore he must be innocent. And like I said, the ADL, the American Defamation League, was created specifically to defend a pedophile and child murderer just because he's Jewish. So it was literally created to protect Jews and only Jews, even when they're guilty of rape and murder. And I find this despicable. the article, the Wikipedia article, needs to get rid of this garbage. Okay, this is unencyclopedic, especially when it runs in the face of facts and evidence. And Leo Frank was never found innocent. He was, quote unquote, pardoned because of Jewish lobbyist groups, and that's it.